civic duty to cast my vote on election day. And I will, having already thought about the various candidates, I will make my choices, and then I will work my way through the various initiatives which are written to confuse us, basically. I've always been proud to cast my vote. You know, when I'm at the polling place, standing in line, I'm just like everybody else, which is kind of a nice feeling to be, even though I wear my full priestly suit and carry a big Bible with me, intimidate people. I first voted in 1976, so I graduated from high school. That summer I turned 18, and then I was ready to vote in November. I was so excited about it, but my candidate lost. And I was kind of discouraged, you know. I was off to a bad start in terms of voting for winners. I'll let you figure out who that was in 76 who lost. But it didn't sway me from wanting to be involved in the political process. I never stopped voting. I don't think I've ever missed an election. And over the years, yeah, I voted for some winners and I voted for losers. If you're like me and you take it seriously, you may sometimes lament that we don't have better choices. This probably happens in every election. When it comes down to two viable candidates, sometimes you look at them and say, oh well, you know, I guess we have to choose. But we do have a choice, don't we? Think about the people in our world who do not have a choice, who live under oppressive governments. It's estimated there are still 50 countries. Here we are in the 21st century. 50 countries that are run by dictators or single-party systems. And even though they may have elections, the outcome is predetermined. This is about 2 billion human beings who live under this kind of oppression. Jesus himself lived under an oppressive government. He lived under a dictator, the emperor, Caesar. Tiberius was the emperor during most of Jesus' life. He was the second emperor. And even though he wasn't a terrible guy, he was troubled and paranoid. And at some point he just got tired of governing in Rome because he was so paranoid about plots against him. So he moved to the island of Capri, spending the rest of his days there in depravity and paranoia. And his failed leadership opened the door to worse people like Caligula and the Emperor Nero. Nero, as the emperor, would always be remembered as the emperor who persecuted Christians and who really approved of the deaths of many holy people, including Saints Peter and Paul. So needless to say, Jesus is aware of the political scene, and he carefully navigates that. But the religious leaders who oppose Jesus want him to be made out as an enemy of Rome, because they know Rome has the authority to kill him, and that's what they want to do. So in today's gospel, we hear a plot that they hatch. They send their supporters and disciples to Jesus. The Herodians, by the way, were supporters of King Herod, who was another puppet king of Rome. And they approach Jesus and they say, "Teacher, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" They're hoping to put Jesus in a difficult bind, right? Because if Jesus says we should pay taxes, then that's going to put him at odds with the feelings of his people, his Jewish brothers and sisters, who were oppressively taxed. But if he says, no, we shouldn't pay taxes, then they can accuse him of sedition or treason against Rome. The outcome would not be good. But Jesus knew their intentions, and he answers their question with another question. Whose image is on our coinage? And they produce a coin. Tiberius. The emperor's image was always on the money. And then Jesus says, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. Jesus diffused the threat by making a distinction between civil authority and divine authority. The Pharisees were foiled once again. That question is posed for us today and in every generation. What allegiance do we owe to our civil authorities, and what allegiance do we owe to our God? How do we serve two authorities? Because in fact we are citizens of two kingdoms. How are we to be responsible citizens of this earthly life, this earthly kingdom, while knowing that our true citizenship is in the kingdom of heaven? And as we know, it's often a delicate balancing act, trying to make decisions. As people of faith, we acknowledge we live in a world where there are those in authority over us. Most governments are formed by our own making. They're entrusted with the task of defending us and assuring our rights. Our elected leaders are chosen to represent the will of the whole people, not just of one class or one race or one religion, but all people who live together in one place are represented by those we send to government. The order of society, the protection of our rights, these things depend on having a government which is accountable to us. In some instances, and we know this from world history, governments are imperfect and can fail to provide or to defend. Some governments persecute their own citizens. Some are just downright corrupt. And when this is the case, it's possible that people can rise up and demand a change. Revolutions happen when people feel that their governments are not listening, or out for themselves, or the cause of great corruption. Sometimes revolutions can topple governments. Other revolutions fail, and people can suffer terribly. Look at Syria today. Many years now they've been fighting a war against an uncorrupt government, a civil war. It's destroyed most of the country's infrastructure, led to millions of refugees, at least 500,000 people killed. People believe that some things are worth dying for. And we can only pray that such governments give way, or at least learn how to govern better. Think about Christians who have lived and continue to live under dictatorial regimes, regimes that are hostile to them and their faith. These Christians have to learn how to live in a precarious situation, don't they? They learn what to give to Caesar to make Caesar happy, and what to do and to give to God. They may have to live under oppression, but they've learned what it means to be free in spirit and to worship God in spirit and truth. We also have many examples of people of faith who have refused to give to Caesar for moral reasons and have suffered a terrible fate. Many of the martyrs of our church fall under the category of political martyrs. Now, when I think about these things, I go, thank the Lord that I live as a person of faith in this country. And we should all be grateful for that. But there are those, even in our own democracy, who actively oppose the gospel and would like to silence us. Why? Because there's some things we cannot give to Caesar. Some things we should not give to Caesar. Yes, we pay taxes. Even Jesus paid his taxes. We have to be law-abiding. We must be peaceful because we are people of faith. We serve in all aspects of the government. People of faith are interested in preserving the integrity of our country and our freedoms. But as people of faith, we cannot participate in certain actions which are deemed to be immoral or harmful, even if Caesar allows it. We cannot give to Caesar the authority to deny the human rights of people, or to exploit people on the basis of their religion or their creed, or their social status. We cannot surrender to Caesar the power to oppress the poor, to wage unjust war, perhaps. We cannot surrender to Caesar our right to worship, to speak the truth, to practice our religion. If Caesar demands these things of us, we have a right to disagree and to oppose those policies. So we do that with our words, sometimes with our actions. We do this by being involved in the political process. Again, what to give to Caesar and what to give to God is a delicate balancing act for Christians today. There are some people who simply believe, our civic life and our religious life are two separate entities. But it's not that easy. That's because the Christian faith, being a follower of Christ, requires that we live and act out of that faith. Everything we do, even in our civic lives, reflects what we believe. Our faith will take us into the realm of politics, economics, social movements. Everything we do as people of faith. This is especially true for Catholics. Why? Because our church teaches on almost every subject, every issue confronting our society today. The church speaks about moral and immoral actions. The church speaks about social justice issues, how to guarantee the rights and the dignity of all people. Sometimes people say, the church should just be quiet. It'd be a lot easier. But the church cannot remain silent. The church is the protector of human rights and of our dignity as God's people. It has a right to speak loudly and clearly about the issues that confront us in each generation. And while the church is not in the business of setting policy, it has a right and obligation to speak out as necessary, hoping to form the hearts and the consciences of people to live out the values of God's kingdom. Jesus was not a political activist, but his teachings tended to cut across all segments of society. Whether he was teaching about the need to love your neighbor, to forgive your enemy, to feed the poor, to welcome the foreigner, these teachings have implications for all aspects of civic life. And as a result, we have an obligation to do our best to bring those values into the public arena. Again, we can't impose the gospel on our society and our pluralistic society, but we can work to change society as is necessary. Why? For the well-being of all God's people. This really is a sacred task that goes beyond our civic responsibilities. Another thing that as people of faith we have to recognize, there is no perfect form of government. Yes, some are better than others, for sure. But there's no earthly authority that embraces all the values of God's kingdom. There's no earthly government that has cornered the market on the gospel. So we have to live with that reality. We live with the reality of imperfect leaders. We live with the reality of sin. That is why it's so important to pray and to reflect and to choose who might best serve our people. And if we do this after prayer and discernment, we vote our conscience. And there's no wrong way of doing this. We follow our conscience and we choose. Think about the image of Jesus standing before Pontius Pilate on the day he was crucified. He was handed over to Pilate, who questioned him about this kingdom that he heard of. Because if Jesus was a king, that was going to be a problem with Rome. But Jesus tells Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world." And when Pilate tells Jesus, "Don't you know I have the authority to release you or to crucify you?" Then Jesus says, "You have no authority over me except that which has been given to you by my Father." Jesus speaks the truth. There is no earthly authority which rules without God permitting it. But it is God's desire that those in authority govern in a godly way. If not, then we look to Christ himself. Christ has already been given the authority to establish his own kingdom someday, a kingdom that will truly bring in an eternity of justice, peace, and love.